A lot of love coming out of Los Angeles, California. Thank you so much. We absolutely love that our audience within the United States is reaching locations that are not our highly populated Mormon communities. We love both communities, of course, but it's been very inspiring to see so many listeners coming out of other areas of the country. So once again, thanks LA. You are number one in downloads this week. Thanks so much. There's no relationship there as a foundation, and yet you're coming to me and telling me how I need to change my life when you really don't know anything about who I am or how I respond. Like these types of conversations, you've got to look at the depth of the relationship prior to the challenge. Because with some of your family members, for me, it's you don't know me, I don't know you. You know, our efforts to connect have either failed or it just didn't work for whatever reason. You're not the person I want to have call me out for things because you have never demonstrated a deep connection prior to me doing something you don't like.
Yeah. Well, it really highlights what I think is one of the main points of this podcast, and that is that in this situation, we're listening to contend or to rescue rather than listening to understand.
Yeah.
And I think that's an incredibly important piece. And of course, this happened to me as well. So I'm not sitting here just pointing the finger at people saying you can't do that. It happened to me as well. That I was either in the mindset I have to rescue you or I have to fight this, instead of going, okay, I need to understand this. What is going on here? And I need to get past just the surface understanding it. Right. I need to get to the depth of what is actually going on in Sarah's life. Not just, oh, well, I read the CES letter. Well, you stupid idiot. Why did you do that? That's not approved material. That's just a bunch of lies. And not that I ever said stupid idiot. I don't think I ever said anything like that.
You were good. You're not the only time I feel like you've been truly cruel to me was after the tattoos. You had a bad minute, week, month, whatever. That was one where you've been cruel to me in our relationship. And then a week ago, which will, whatever in our podcast, where my flight response took overall functioning and reasoning, you had a momentary lapse in true cruelty, but as a general rule. So y'all, we've been married for 23 and a half years. Mason gets 3 times in 23 and a half years where you've not been kind, which I think is a huge success story there.
I'm glad you see it that way.
The other thing, though, that I wanted to talk about was, you've got to respect where that other person's at.
Yeah.
Your parents were just here at our home visiting because our 16-year-old was the lead in Guys and Dolls for the high school play. He was not Nathan Detroit in Guys and Dolls, and he did that New York accent. He's a really talented kid. He did that New York accent so well. I was so proud of him. A phenomenal play. The school did a great job with it. But one of the things that was really interesting to me is, your parents came out and they basically ignored me. And I don't think they intentionally ignored me, but in their efforts to respect my boundary about the church and their desire not to create contention, they had made a decision not to talk about the church before they came out. And they literally just didn't talk to me. Like they asked me about the dogs. We talked about training dogs and dog breeds a lot. That was it.
Right. Well, because you can recognize a boundary that you feel is healthy. Like in this case, we're just not going to talk about the church. Whether or not that's actually healthy, that's debatable, right? But in this situation, they felt like that was healthy, and they were doing that out of respect for you.
Right.
It didn't translate that way really, but that's
Nope.
that was their reasoning.
Nope. Your mom and I drove in a car for at least 40 minutes, And she literally did not say a word.
Right. Because
It was awkward.
Because they didn't then take it one step further and go, okay, we're not going to talk about church stuff. What are we going to talk about? Because they couldn't go, well, we don't talk about church stuff and we just ignore Sarah. That's not going to demonstrate respect. Like, if that's where they're coming from, if they're coming from this place of, we want to show respect to the fact that Sarah's made a decision. She knows we're not happy with the decision, but it's not our decision to make. We want to demonstrate that we have respect for her as a person, that she's still our daughter-in-law, she's still important to us. So we're not going to talk about church stuff. Well, then you got to take another step and go, okay, well, how do we then...
What are some safe topics here?
Right. How do we then demonstrate respect? Because if you show up and you just ignore her because you can't talk about this topic, which is odd, but... You know, my mom's expressed that before, almost like, well, what do we talk about if we don't talk about the church? Which isn't even accurate.
No, because your mom and I had a great relationship.
You guys have always talked about other stuff.
We've talked about food and health and supplements and exercise.
Talk about kids and family. Yeah, so
your
there's
mom
all
and
kinds
I
of other topics.
Right, we can talk about politics and all these other things, but because Sarah's not a member...
Right.
The
suddenly
safest thing to
we can't
do
talk anymore.
Is silence. And I think a lot of that's because there's a fear there that if they engage with me, I'm going to lead them astray. Like, it is a protective thing. So Mason, as you're talking about where you were at and that I need to rescue Sarah, I need to fix this, I need to bring her back. All of that is an amygdala response to me leaving. That's you were in your amygdala for a prolonged period of time because your family, your existential family, was being threatened. And for your entire life, that existential end point has been what you have worked for forever.
It's been what my focus is on.
It's been your entire focus.
Everything that I've done is related to or directly applicable to that pathway. Yes. Right. It's all about getting me back to God. If it doesn't affect that path, okay, fine, I can give it some attention, but most things are going to affect that path. And So
is there anything else from your story? Because you haven't really been very linear or anything. You've kind of been just general, like for that year. You've just kind of been like, this is where I was for that whole year. Is there anything specific in there that you want to
So there was one other thing that I noticed. And so some of this, unfortunately for y'all, you're kind of getting me as I process through some of these mistakes. And I'm...
Fortunately for you all, you are getting a very raw Mason.
Well, my natural process is to avoid the details. And so I'm struggling with that too. Like, I want to be able to talk about the details in such a way that we can recognize and figure out how to get through them. But one of the things that I did that I thought was just a part of my freeze response was just kind of hoping this will all go away. Mm-hmm. But what I realize now, and this is a very new revelation to me, what I realize now is what I was actually doing is what's called stonewalling.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't recognize that. And stonewalling, if you're not familiar, is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, according to the Gottmans. Mm-hmm. Very, very important stuff. Those are the 4 things that they talk about that will lead your marriage to divorce if you continue them.
So stonewalling looks like disengaging from the conversation or the relationship, turning away, avoiding talking about things. It's a flight/freeze, freeze/flight response in that you go silent.
Right. Well, and what I thought I was doing was avoiding the conflict that would drive us apart by not talking about it. But in actuality, what I was doing was avoiding connecting and talking about the things that needed to be talked about so that we could work through and emotionally bond over a very difficult situation. Mm-hmm. And the reason I bring that up is because that is one of the biggest mistakes that I made.
I appreciate you.
And that didn't change.
Giving that a voice.
Thanks. That didn't change until you laid my heart on a chopping block again.
Right.
And you said either you get emotionally engaged in this or we're getting divorced. I'm walking away because your silencing is silencing me.
Right. So at about the 11 mark,